Around this time last year, riots upturned the lives of many, from small businesses to major corporations in parts of South Africa. With billions of rand in insurance claims, we'll check in on how things have shaped up a year later. We'll also look into Benin Republic's new facility from the International Monetary Fund. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Let's start with the African business headlines. Farmers in Nyando, Kisumu County in Kenya have now benefited from a new tomato processing plant, which will provide them with a ready market for their harvest. In order to boost agro-industry and enhance livelihoods, the Kochieng tomato processing plant has opened its doors. Farmers in Kobura who have struggled to find a market for their tomatoes now have the opportunity to extend the shelf life of their goods. And staying in Kenya, after the Salaries and Remuneration Commission announced the deadline for reducing public employees' generous allowances, civil servants will begin losing 2 billion Kenyan shillings each week as of October. The evaluation of a policy that would govern allowances in the public service is 80% complete, according to SRC chairperson Lynn Mangichi, and it will be put into effect over the next 3 months, clearing the way for the deletion and consolidation of some benefits in October. There are currently over 247 remunerative and facilitative allowances, up from 31 in 1999, payable within the public sector. They have the effort of doubling a worker's monthly pay and account for 48% of the stage wage bill. Moving now to West Africa and Nigeria, Aeroton Exploration and Production Company Limited has confirmed that a second wellhead in its oil mining acreage has suffered another incident suspected to be third-party interference. While speaking on behalf of the company, the head of External Affairs and Corporate Communications, Mercy Max Ebibi, confirmed the incident, saying that the spill was observed coming from the wing valve arm, which appeared to have been vandalized alongside the valves and control panels, among others. The Central Bank of Nigeria has directed financial institutions and payment service providers to do more to enhance transparency and proper disclosure of digital financial services going forward. The Apex Bank also mandated deposit money banks, merchant banks, other financial institutions, payment service banks, and other payment service institutions under its regulation to boost their fraud prevention and risk management capabilities by providing fraud prevention messages and tips for consumers using both audio and virtual modes of communication in local languages. South Africa's minister in charge of embattled state-owned companies has given an impassioned defense of the sale of a majority stake in the national carrier for about $3. Yes, just $3. The deal is now at the center of a lawsuit from one of the spurned bidders. The privatization of South African Airways is a vital reform for the country's battered economy, Public Enterprises Minister Parvin Gordhan has said. The winning bidder, a partnership between a domestic aviation group and a private equity firm, was the one left with the most credible financial backing and industry experience. Those are our headlines at this time. We're going to take a quick time out, and when we come back, our first conversation of the day looks at 1 year after the South African riots in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces and what has happened to the businesses that suffered. Stay with us. The days of July 9th through the 18th of 2021 is a period that many South Africans will not forget quickly. Throughout those days last year, rioting and looting sparked by the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma for contempt of court in KwaZulu-Natal and later spread to the province of Gauteng. Now known as the July turmoil, it was the worst violence that South Africa had experienced since the end of apartheid. And when the dust settled, more than 300 people had died, while hundreds of businesses suffered losses running into the millions and billions of rand. The rioting and looting also laid or rather led to layoffs and only worsened things for South Africa's economy, which was still trying to recover from COVID-19 and a recession. Many businesses turned to SASRIA, a non-life insurance company that provides coverage for harm caused by specific risk like politically motivated hostile acts, riots, strikes, terrorism, and even public disorder. And they filed insurance claims as well. After the riots in July, SASRIA received 33 billion rand in claims, and by February, 17 billion rand in those claims had been paid off. Now joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Muzi Klala. He's the Executive Manager, Stakeholder Management at SASRIA. Muzi, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tully. Good to be here.
So 1 year, some 365 days later, gives us a lot more perspective in terms of how things played out for many of the businesses affected in the rioting last July. So let's start with that. In terms of the effect on businesses in South Africa, what was the impact?
Yeah, the impact, rightfully, as you have mentioned, to SASRIA, the total amount of claims that we have incurred is a total of 35 billion rands. But that is not the total amount of the economic loss that the country at large had suffered. It is estimated to be between 55 and 60 billion in total, and that is in rands. And SASRIA obviously is taking 35 billion of that. That is what we are paying out. The biggest impact was largely on property owners. They suffered really, I would say, the most, followed by the retailers. So the retailers would pretty much be some of the biggest retailers that you also know about, to the very smallest ones. They suffered the most because those are the ones that were actually looted at first before they went to torching the buildings and destroying them to the ground. So the biggest impact would really be on those ones. But then again, at the same time, there are a number of businesses that were not insured that suffered as well.
And we'll get to those in terms of what happens to the businesses not insured. But let's look at the type of businesses. So you mentioned property owners and then also mentioned the retailers as well. When it comes to these situations, rioters and looters don't discriminate. And we know that small businesses are a major part of South Africa's economy as well. So how does small businesses, maybe not attached to the large retail chains, not attached to many names we might recognize, how do small businesses fare in this situation?
Majority of them that really suffered the most are actually the ones that were close to the big retailers, the ones that are in big malls, in big shopping centers, the ones that were isolated. There hasn't really been too many incidents reported on those ones. So quite a number of them, I would say about close to about 50% of all the ones that operated within those large areas, they really suffered a whole lot, from looting to all the way to some of the buildings that were looted and even destroyed. But obviously, most of them don't own the property, so they just suffered having lost the total number of stock that they had.
So it seems SASRIA has received some 20,000 or more than 20,000 claims that have been filed. And in these situations, we always know there will be attempts to file fraudulent claims. So as we get into the claims conversation, were there instances of fraudulent claims filed in this situation? And in terms of the payments, because I do remember having a conversation with a representative of SASRIA last year, they basically said, bring your claim as long as we can prove to a certain extent there is a business, we will pay it out. So let's talk about the investigations. Let's talk about fraudulent claims. What was the process for you and for the businesses making these claims?
We found that there were a whole lot of opportunistic inflation of claims. I think the biggest part of what you deem to be fraudulent claims actually came from people who had legitimate claims, majority of them, but they would inflate the claims, obviously taking the opportunity, using the event as an opportunity for them to inflate to levels where we started investigating, actually get to the bottom of it. We insisted on getting records. We went as far as talking to the taxman within South Africa, the South African Revenue Services, in order to get declarations, in order for us to be able to quantify those ones. So that's where we spent really a lot of our times, where we found that a good number of our clients had actually inflated some of those claims, but we did get through that. And at the same time, there is a small number of clients who took a chance, I would say. An example of them would be one of the clients who had actually removed stock from their business and put it elsewhere conveniently, and claimed that there was total looting of his property, and everything was taken away by the looters. But then there were obviously whistleblowers as well that would give us such information as to say that they had actually witnessed to see this happening. So we did quite a lot of investigation, spent a lot of time on investigation, because the quantum, the number of claims was just getting extremely out of hand, and we needed to ensure that we get to the bottom of it. And as we speak today, we have paid about 25 billion rands of the total amount. We still have another 10 billion that is still outstanding.
Okay, so and that was my next question. So about 25 billion of the total amount paid so far. And in terms of the claims, around 80% of these claims under 30 million rand have also been paid. And you found a lot of claims were just under that 1 million rand category. So how many, let's look at the categorization of the claims as well. How much typically were you paying out to many of these businesses?
Okay, so it's a scenario of 90-10. So 10% of all the claims that we received amounted for 90% of the value. And the 90% of the claims were really small claims, as you say, between 5 million and a million. So that's where the majority of the claims came from. So the numbers were skewed in that sense. So we spent quite a lot of time, first of all, on the small claims, because those are the ones that we needed to ensure that we pay and we get all of our clients back to the position than they were before, just to stimulate the economy as well, because we needed to do that. The large entities, they have quite big balance sheets. They could take on a bit of strain during the time. So we really tried very hard to ensure that the claims up to 1 million were the first ones. So we used our traditional insurance market, because SASRIA is one entity that takes care of the entire South Africa in respect of the special risk that you've just mentioned. So we partnered with the private sector, and they came in very handy. And that is from the brokers. So you have the broker who's the middleman who helped us with the classification of the claims, particularly for the small business owners. And then the traditional insurance company, we use them and we use their distribution channels. And we also use their assessment protocols, not necessarily protocols, but their assessors in respect of getting to quantify the damages, the appointment of the assessor, the quantification of the losses, as well as binding of those values all the way up to 1 million rand. So we gave them mandates in order to do that on our behalf. And then everything that was between 1 million and 5 million, we also partnered with a few other very large entities that helped us with that regard. So for SASRIA, we dealt with all the claims from 5 million to 30 million was another band that we used. And then there was 30 to 60. That's another band that we're using in categorization, and everything up to 500 million and up to 1.5 billion as well. There are some big clients that suffered in excess of 1.5 billion. And like one of our biggest ones suffered 1.8 billion rands worth of damage, but they were only insured up to 1.5 billion with us. So we had handled that claim up to that limit.
Okay, so when you look at that in terms of the 80% of the claims that have been settled, and of course, as you said, the 90-10 kind of conversation being had, when does SASRIA anticipate finishing and basically closing out claims from the July turmoil from last year?
Yeah, so amongst the 10 billion that is still outstanding, there's quite something that is really peculiar that is happening here. So the first ones are the ones that I'd say 5 billion rands of the 10 billion that is outstanding. It falls within the band of what we call the rebuilds. So those are the very large properties that we are helping to rebuild. So we decided that we're not going to pay cash up front. We're not going to do cash in lieu, because that would have encouraged the property owners not to rebuild, which means that people would not be re-employed, which also means that they would not be putting the money back into the economy as well. So we decided that we were going to work with them in order to rebuild. So there's a rebuilding process that's going to take about 18 months, more or less, in total for the about 5 billion rands of the 10 billion that is out there. So we do it on a project basis. So we pay as and when there's requirement for a part of the rebuilding process that takes place. And then that leaves us then with another 5 billion that is outstanding. 2 billion of that is associated to business interruption cases. So what happens is if a business has been burnt down and it's not operating, there is a revenue that has been lost, obviously, by the property owner or by the business owner. So there's an element of business interruption then where we pay either on a gross profit basis or various bases that would have been agreed with the client up front. So there's an amount of 2 billion rands that we are paying out over a period of time that includes rents, property owners, and that gross profit for some business owners. So that amount is also one that it's going to take a bit of time, because between last year and now, I think there's still another 6 months to go to continue with that process. And then it leaves us with a very small band, which is quite strange. Now, in insurance, you have a point where you finalize the claim. And once the claim has been finalized, there's an agreement of loss, which then is being shared with the client to give them an opportunity to sign it and give it back to us so that we can settle the claim and pay it out. So we find that there is a certain number of our clients that are not coming back to us with the signed agreement of losses, and which is quite strange, because it means that if they sign the agreement of loss, we pay them out, and then they're able to proceed with the businesses, and they're able to continue really doing businesses with whoever, on whichever part of the industry that they're operating. But we're not getting a lot of feedback on those clients. And then the last part, which then is the one that covers the difference, would be some of the clients that are not able to provide us with certain information that we require for us in order to settle the claim. So a client would have a sum insured, let's say, of 500 million, and they would claim for the full 500 million, but we wouldn't necessarily do it that way, because we need to quantify what the exact amount was, because it could be 300 million, and we needed certain information that justifies that information. That's as far as we went to speak to the taxman as well, to say, can they assist in providing us with information from their filing of the taxes? So that is where, again, we have another difference. We are unable to pay the full amount because we need to bring the client back to the position that they were before without necessarily enriching them.
All right, so we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, let's look at situations around the insurance reprieve. What may have happened to those who were not able, who did not have an insurance claim with you or had any kind of insurance agreement and were left in the cold? And some have said that South Africa should prepare for more such riots again. And we'll see where SASRIA stands on that as well. The conversation will continue 1 year after the South African riots, now known as the July turmoil. Where do businesses in South Africa stand? Where do the insurance claims for those businesses stand? The conversation after this. So with me is Muzi Lala. He's the Executive Manager, Stakeholder Management at SASRIA, and we're looking at 1 year after the riots in South Africa. Now, Muzi, it was reported that business owners affected by the attack and who had proper documentation could lay claim to insurance benefits as managed by SASRIA. And you've talked about, of course, the issue around documentation as well, some kind of insurance reprieve. Tell us what the status of that is right now.
Yeah, so we pretty much at this moment in a position where we've quantified exactly how much needs to be paid out. It's just a matter of confirming, doing a couple of confirmations in respect of those outstanding claims. And I think from our estimation, we should be in a position to settle this within the next 3 to 6 months. Then the only thing that we expect to still have left would be the rebuilding process, which obviously by default, it takes quite a bit of time to get.
So given that SASRIA is a state-owned entity or a state corporation in a manner of speaking, what can SASRIA or what has SASRIA done, if any, for other businesses that did not have papers to file claims or did not have insurance cover at all? It's a very vital situation here, given the state of South Africa's economy and the need to get every single business back up and running and employing people. Was there anything SASRIA was able to do for this category of individuals?
Not necessarily through SASRIA, because we are a registered insurer, so we only work on the basis of relieving where there is a legitimate active insurance policy. But there has been something done by the National Treasury. So the National Treasury reserved an amount of, I think, around 5 billion rands that was put aside to assist. So it used some of its states of organs, like the Industrial Development Corporation, where they launched some funding packages in response to the civil unrest and the looting that took place. So pretty much what that does, then it puts certain mechanisms in place where they identify who these people are that are affected, because Treasury is ultimately the last insurer of resort in respect of relieving those vulnerable communities, because the ones who did not have access to insurance, who did not insure, are mostly the small businesses as well as those very vulnerable people in the community. So that fund was reserved as some type of a business recovery package, which then included some support, for the businesses, for the communities that were impacted as well. So that is part of the comprehensive economic recovery package that was announced by Treasury as well as by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition in South Africa.
All right. So SASRIA is the only non-life insurer in the whole of South Africa. And as I said earlier, you provide special risk cover for businesses and individuals, as well as government entities. You cover risks such as civil commotion, public disorder, strike, riots, and terrorism. Now, this is the worst violence the country has seen since apartheid. While it's linked to the situation around former President Jacob Zuma, there are some analysts who are saying that given the continuing high rates of unemployment, the continued high rates of inequality that South Africa experiences, as well as a number of other factors, that the potential for such riots to continue or to happen more frequently is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So as the insurer in this situation, what risk analysis has SASRIA done on this?
There are two parts that we needed to go back and revisit. The first one is our scenario planning, as well as the potential of our maximum or working out of what our maximum probable losses could look like. That is the first part. The second part is implementing additional indicators that will give us a bit more intelligence, a bit more in advance in respect of what potentially could be happening in various areas, so that when things are escalating, the most important thing for us, which we are now tying up and we are creating a very comprehensive integrated approach, is that you have various defense of levels of defense. The first one is the client themselves having to take care of their property. And then secondly, is communities. What happened last year, for instance, in Soweto, one of the biggest townships in the world, was that one of the biggest malls they have there, it was the community that prevented the looters from getting into that mall and actually looting it. It was one of those ones that was saved. It was saved by the community. So that's the second level that we're strengthening. So, and it includes the communities as well, like the taxi associations, as well as the taxi community in itself. Because when there has been destruction, they suffer the most because there's no movement. So they obviously are a stakeholder that is quite important in getting into this. So we are linking those. And then the third one is obviously the police, getting the police to be able to respond on time in respect of the intelligence that we would have, as well as the happenings as they happen at a particular time. And the integration then would then spill over to the last result, which is the army as well. So to put it simply for you is that, yes, the indicators, the high unemployment rate, service delivery issues, and all of those elements that could lead to an unrest are there because, protesting is a legal right for South Africans to do that. Mm-hmm. The problem is that when it escalates to violence, that's when it becomes an issue. So it is combating of the escalation of the violence that we are working very hard in combating, so that should it happen, because we cannot necessarily say that it will not happen, should it happen, that we're able to mitigate against the impact. That is the biggest thing that we've worked on. And then obviously the last thing would be to look at the entity in itself, to look at our reserves so that we balance our assets and liabilities and strengthen the organization in respect of being able to handle losses at least that fall within the 1 in 200 years scenario.
All right, so finally, Muzi, before I let you go, South Africa is one of the very few countries that has this type of insurance cover, and I found that really quite interesting. So it puts you ahead, it puts you a bit more modern than many insurance industries around the world. So why is this type of insurance cover important for South Africa? It's sort of a hindsight question. We've seen the importance of it, and we've seen how it has helped many businesses now. But before July 2021, many people would ask, why have SASRIA type of cover? So let me take you back and sort of ask that question now.
Yeah, that's a very good one, because most people don't really understand, and most people didn't even know that they have a SASRIA risk that they needed to take care of. So it all started in 1976. SASRIA perils, which are the ones you've mentioned now, civil commotion, riots and strikes, terrorism, all of those were covered by the private sector. But with 1976 and the years leading to 1976, we got to a point where the private equity that is invested in private insurance companies could no longer take care of the risk. So they started de-risking. And South Africa, because of our history, apartheid history, there was a lot of fighting against the system that led to a lot of violent protests that were taking place. So that's what gave rise to SASRIA. But obviously, over the years, we saw a decrease, in events like we saw last year, up to a point where we would have like your service delivery protest happening there and there. But events of this nature had not really been seen in South Africa for quite a long time. But again, it just justifies the reason why the entity in itself is relevant even today. How many years? Almost 45 years from 1976.
All right, Muzi Lala, thank you so much for joining us. We, of course, have kept up with the conversation around South Africa, the inequality, the high unemployment, and, of course, the rights as well. And I know that there will be more points of conversation to be had with you and your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that conversation, of course, ending with that SASRIA stands for the South Africa Special Risk Insurance Association. And the country is one of the few countries that has that type of cover. And as he said, about 40-something years after SASRIA was created, it came into full effect and really helped many across two provinces, the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, to get back on their feet after the July turmoil. 1 year later, almost 80%, if not more, of the claims have been settled, and the company is looking to finalize and close out, especially with rebuilding in the next 18 months. That's our first conversation right here on Business Edge. Lekan Onabanjo standing by to give you the international business news, and of course, the show will continue.